All right, well, good morning, guys. I don't know if any of you saw the movie Divergent. I saw that last night. Anybody see that yet? A couple of you? I didn't read the book. I'm more of a wait for the movie to come out type of guy. Well, let me save you the $10 if you haven't seen it already. Anybody see the movie Equilibrium or Hunger Games? Because it's basically those two movies put into one movie. But in this movie Divergent, there's this girl who's called a divergent, which means that she doesn't fit into the system that society has in place. And so the government tries to kill all these divergent, rebel type of, square peg in a round hole type of people. And there's an old saying that says that we fear what we don't understand. We fear what we don't understand. And that was kind of the case in this movie last night, is that they feared the people that they didn't understand or that they couldn't quite control. And I remember during the 1980s, I know this is before you guys were born, but the AIDS epidemic had really come to a climax. There was a huge scare all around the world, and in the media, AIDS had really gotten everyone's attention, and people were fearful. People didn't understand it. There was all sorts of rumors circulating around about AIDS. If you would get AIDS if you hugged someone that had AIDS, or if you kissed someone that had AIDS. You couldn't touch someone that had AIDS. And of course, if you had the disease, or people thought you had the disease, you were very much stigmatized. People just avoided you. And people were so fearful because they didn't understand. But one of the craziest rumors that I remember hearing was the toilet seat rumor. And this rumor basically said that if you were in public, or you used a restroom, a toilet seat, after somebody with AIDS had used it, then you would get AIDS that way too. And all sorts of these crazy rumors went around. Well, of course, if you had AIDS, how do you think you felt? I mean, it was like you tried to hide that. It was very shameful, of course, but I would imagine if anyone knew, you just had this target on you that just said, don't touch this person, stay away from this person. Well, today what I want to talk about is an example of this in Scripture, and how Jesus comes onto the scene, and not only does he save a man from a disease, but he really changes the way that culture viewed this particular disease, this particular sickness. And so if you have your Bibles, we're going to be looking at Matthew 8. So if you have those, please take them out. And the passage we're looking at is Matthew 8, 1 through 3. And I'll give you a second to turn there, but Jesus is on the scene. He's doing his ministry, and he's going around, and he's teaching, and he's doing awesome things. And we're going to see an encounter here that he has with a man with leprosy and with a crowd of people. So if you have Matthew 8, we're going to look at verses 1 through 3. Let me read that for you. When Jesus came down from the mountain, large crowds followed him. And a leper came to him and bowed down before him and said, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." Jesus stretched out his hand and he touched him, saying, "I am willing, be cleansed." And immediately his leprosy was cleansed. Now this looks pretty straightforward, pretty cut and dry, pretty simple on the surface. But what I want to do in the moments ahead is I want to really unpack this story. Because other than just the obvious text here, there's so much that's going on in Jesus' mind, in the leper's mind, in the crowd's mind. And it's very important for us to pull some application out of this message. So we're going to peruse through Matthew 8, 1 through 3. And it starts with this. It says, "Now when Jesus came down from the mountain." Now, if you are familiar with the Gospel of Matthew, chapters 5, 6, and 7 are what's called the Sermon on the Mount. And it's one of the most famous portions of Scripture. And what Jesus did, now if you've seen pictures of the Holy Lands, their mountain is not like our mountains here. You guys drive up to Lake Tahoe, and you're so high up. There's sometimes snow on the tops of those mountains all year round. These are not the kind of mountains that we think of, like climbing and hiking up into the Sierras. These were what we would consider hillsides. And so the region here was just kind of scattered with these little hills, but they refer to them as mountains. Well, Jesus would go up onto these hillsides, and that created really a natural amphitheater type of effect. so that he would be able to speak to a large crowd of people. One, he elevated himself so that people could see him, but then also his voice created that amphitheater effect for having people scattered down on the hillside below him or on the valley floor below him. And he had just finished speaking what we call the Sermon on the Mount, and now he's done and he comes down from the mountainside. So that's what's going on here. That's kind of setting the stage. It says, when Jesus came down from the mountain, large crowds followed him. Now, large crowds did follow Jesus everywhere he went. Jesus was preaching a gospel, which means good news. Jesus was saying pretty radical things that nobody had ever heard of before. They were saying that he doesn't teach like any of the other teachers that they're used to. Not only that, of course, Jesus was performing miracles. And in fact, John the Baptist had said when he saw Jesus coming to be baptized, he said, here is the Lamb of God, the one who's come to take away the sins of the world. So it had already been professed that he was the Messiah, and people were curious. Is this really the one that the prophets spoke of? Is this really the Messiah who's come to save us and to deliver our people? So everywhere Jesus went, there was huge crowds of people. Sometimes they just wanted to get near him, to touch him, because he had this celebrity type status. He was very much a celebrity. Everywhere in the surrounding regions, people were all abuzz that Jesus, that the possible Messiah was going around. And he did what? He healed that person. What happened? And all these crazy stories and rumors were circulating. So when Jesus was in your area, or sometimes you would travel, and you would just, where's Jesus at now? You would follow him. So these large crowds were forming, and they wanted to hear what he had to say. Sometimes they would bring him their sick, they're diseased. But anyways, there was a large crowd, and Jesus was coming down the mountain, and now Jesus is kind of infiltrated by all these people. He had been at this elevated position speaking. Now he comes down, and now he's just surrounded by a huge crowd of people. We don't know how many, probably thousands. Well, then it says this, when Jesus came down from the mountain, large crowds followed him, and a leper came to him. Now, I don't know what you know about leprosy. First of all, what do you know about leprosy? Yeah. It's a disease on the skin that does what? Eats through your skin, yeah.
It numbs the nerves. That way it raises.
Okay. Yeah, you guys are right, yeah. It's really contagious. It numbs your nerves. Well, these were some of the things that people thought, and there's a lot more that can be said about leprosy. He says it's contagious. But leprosy, and I'm not an expert on the subject, but it does, it kills you from the inside out. It eats away at your body slowly, and usually what happens is it starts to kill off the appendages first. Toes, fingers, your nose, your ears. People that have leprosy, they start to have white flaky skin as their fingertips start to die away, or the outside of their skin starts to die. And they'll sometimes, if they live long enough, they'll be missing fingers, maybe they'll be missing a hand, ears will start to fall off. And so that's how it tends to kill you. It slowly eats you away. But it's apparently not very painful from what I understand, because it eats away at your nerves so you don't feel it. Sometimes it's said that people with leprosy, there could be a dog chewing at your foot, eating off your leprous foot, and you don't even know that it's doing that. So it's a very odd disease. But what people used to think, especially in Jesus' time, was that it was a disease that was caused by God, meaning that if you were cursed by God, he would zap you with leprosy. And so in the society, the Jewish society, it was very much stigmatized that, wow, that person's unclean, not only because he has a disease, but he's got a special disease, like that dude is cursed by God. And the word unclean was given to someone with leprosy. Now, if you were unclean, and if you were in the Hebrew people, you could no longer buy or sell or trade amongst the Hebrew people, because they wouldn't do business with you. Your family would disown you. People would not physically touch you. And so most often lepers were resorted to being beggars on the street corner. And so just imagine that lifestyle. You've seen people begging before. You can leave the church property and you see people with the cardboard signs, help out, a veteran, or we'll work for food or something. But to see somebody there just kind of wearing old rags and just maybe having a cup or a bowl out, that's how they lived. And they were very much avoided by society at all costs. So this leper, though, he knows that Jesus is in town. Somehow he's gotten the word, the buzz has gone through the community, and Jesus is here. Well, this leper, I'm sure, is starting to see an influx of people coming through the area. What's going on? Oh, Jesus is here. Oh, look at all these crowds of people showing up. Jesus is in town. Well, he hears the rumors. He's heard the stories. You know, the word about Jesus is beginning to spread. And he says, I got to go to him. I'm going to go to Jesus. And a leper comes to Jesus. Now, think about this scene. Here's Jesus. At this point, he's surrounded by people. There's a huge multitude crowd of people. And this leper comes to Jesus. Let's go on and let's see what happens here. When Jesus came down from the mountain, large crowds followed him, and a leper came to him and bowed down before him. Now, first of all, let's think about the scene with the lepers coming through the crowd for a second. Imagine if you were this leper, and a typical day in your life would be sitting on a street corner in an alleyway, and you're begging. And maybe if a mom and her little kids are coming around the corner and they see you, she grabs the kids, says, "Don't touch that man." And she takes them and she walks to the other side of the street. You know, "Mommy, what's up? What's going on? He's been cursed by God. Don't touch him. Don't ever talk to those people. Don't ever touch those people." And you would take your kids and you would just try to avoid them at all costs. Now here's this leper making his way through a crowd of people. And just imagine the scene. Imagine that parents are pulling their kids out of the way. People are probably cussing and screaming at him. "What are you doing here? How dare you try to come through this crowd of people?" People are probably spitting at him, maybe throwing things at him. And this whole time, this leper is making his way through this crowd. Hundreds, possibly thousands of people. But that's how determined he is to get to Jesus. And just imagine the humiliation, the accosting that he received, and people doing horrific things and yelling horrible things at him. And what does that say to you about the man's heart? I believe that this guy was a convert. I believe that he already had a relationship with God. He already believed in God. And I'm going to unpack a little bit more as to why I think that is. But just the sheer fact that he would go through that, probably the most humiliating, embarrassing time in his life, but he's just, I don't care, I've got to get to Jesus. And it says this, he came to him and he bowed down before him. Not only does that display of going through the crowd demonstrate some pretty radical faith, but then as soon as he gets to Jesus, and I'm sure at that point there's kind of a parting of the sea. I'm sure there was a big gap around him and Jesus at this point, because people were pressed in around Jesus all the time, and now this leper's there, everyone's jumping back. This guy's got space, and so he gets down on the ground and he bows before the Lord. And he says this. He said, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." Now here's some other hints that make me believe that this man was a believer. One, he addresses him as Lord. He doesn't just call him teacher or rabbi, which was a popular expression of the day, regarding Jesus, because people, they had mixed feelings. Is he really the Messiah? Is he really God? Is he a prophet? He's going around teaching, so we can call him teacher. But he bows down before him and he says, "Lord," and he just addresses him as God. And then he says this, "If you are willing." That word "willing" is so awesome. He doesn't come to him and say, "Is it possible that you can heal me? I've heard these rumors. Are you capable? Could you possibly?" He says, "No, Lord, I know you can. If you're willing, you can make me clean. If you are willing, you can make me clean." See, this guy already had his mind made up that he was God, that he was capable. And now he just says, "Lord, ultimately, it's your will, not mine. If you want, you can make me clean." But he bowed down in reverence and he just worshiped him. That act of coming through that crowd What a beautiful display of worship right there. I'm sure Jesus was just feeling the praise from this man's faith, that he would endure such an ugly, horrific mob of people and then in front of all them bow down and just say, your will be done. You know I'm unclean, but you can make me clean if you're willing. Not if you can, or not if you're capable, but if you are willing. And again, he says that word clean. He doesn't say, Lord, if you are willing, you can take away my leprosy. He says, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Again, a very specific word. What do you think he was wanting? If he was made clean, he would now be introduced back into society. He could now worship at the synagogue, which he was not able to do because he was unclean. He would now be able to live amongst and buy and sell. He would maybe be reunited with his family. Just being clean, that's all he wanted. It wasn't even about the leprosy. Just, I want to be a person again. I want to feel like a human being. You've seen just now, coming through this crowd, how I'm treated every single day. I just want to be considered clean again. It says this, when Jesus came down from the mountain, large crowds followed him, and a leper came to him and bowed down before him and said, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Jesus stretched out his hand and he touched him. Now, first of all, what do you suppose the crowd's reaction was at this point when Jesus, and I don't know what that touch looks like. I don't know if he went up to the man and just kind of put his hand on his cheek. I don't know if he embraced him. I don't know what that touch looked like, but you can imagine it was a very caring, gentle touch. But what do you suppose was the reaction from the crowd when Jesus takes the initiative and reaches out and he touches the man? What do you think the crowd's reaction was? What do you think? Yeah? Shock. Probably a loud gasp was heard by everyone, was made by everyone. Yeah, I can imagine, here's Jesus, and now this man, keep in mind, everyone assumes this man's been cursed by God. Nobody would touch him, and the thought was that leprosy was crazy contagious. Don't touch him or else you're going to get it too. Well, Jesus touches the man. He probably holds the man. He probably embraces the man to some degree, and the crowd gasps. Like, well, now Jesus has got it. This guy, what a foolish move. He couldn't possibly, that he would know better if he was God. And all these things, all these thoughts are going through the crowd's mind. Well, why do you suppose Jesus touched the man before he healed him? Because he didn't heal him yet. First he touches him. First he holds him. First he embraces him. Why do you think he does that first? Yeah.
He's making a statement.
What statement is he making? That the man isn't unclean? Okay. Yeah, what do you think? Okay, that the man may be physically unclean, but spiritually he is a clean being. Okay, Jesus wants to show his power to the crowd so that the crowd would know that Jesus couldn't be affected by this disease. Yeah, what do you think? Oh, good. That this disease didn't define who he is. You see, I like that. I think all you guys are right on. But see, it would have been one thing for Jesus to say, okay, whoa, all right, just stay right there. I heal you in the name of the Father, you're now cleansed. And then the man's leprosy goes away, and then Jesus comes up and embraces him. What does that communicate? What do you think that would have communicated? A total rejection. Okay. Okay, yeah, it shows love, it shows compassion. If Jesus had stayed back and then healed him and then went and embraced and touched the man, it would have validated everyone's thoughts. That, yup, we can't touch these people. That, yup, they're unclean and we need to just keep our distance. The Lord showed us a great example right there. by healing him first. Well, no, that's not what Jesus did. Jesus, I think him touching the man first had two significant points. One was he wanted to show the crowd and the culture that they have a misperception about this disease. There was a man named John who used to be a member of First Covenant Church here, and a long time ago he went on a mission trip to India, and he went with a group of like college and 20-something age people, and they went to work at a leper colony in India. And he says, he comes back and he tells a pretty radical story. It stuck with me for years. He said that at this leper colony, you see the missing fingers, you see all the descriptions of the lepers and the missing appendages and everything. And he says he went up to a woman about this tall, and he just went up to her and he just gave her a huge hug, and he just embraced this woman. And he says as soon as he hugged her, her knees just gave out right underneath her, and she just collapsed to the ground. And at first he was a little shocked and surprised. Did he hurt her? Did he crush her? Well, she hadn't been touched by a human being in so many years that she physically didn't even know how to respond to that. Her knees just gave out and she just crumbled to the ground, and in tears, she just needed so badly to feel like a human being again. Because in India, where these lepers are colonized, they're beggars. They live off any help from ministries. But imagine to not be touched by another human being. Like, I can't imagine a day where I don't hug and kiss my kids. I just don't even know what that would be like. But to be rejected not only by your family, but just by every other person in society. Well, Jesus was changing their mindset. He says, look, this disease, one, it's not contagious. You can touch these people. You can love these people. And he shatters the cultural mindset. But what does he do to the man? He says, before I take care of this leprosy, you're not defined by your disease. Because had he cured him first and then touched him and embraced him, he would have said, you were the leper, now you're worthy to be one of us again. He says, no. He touches him. That man probably hadn't been touched in who knows how long. And just imagine the man's emotions. See, Jesus said, I want to heal you emotionally before I heal you physically. I want to take care of that emotional need in your life before I take care of that physical need. And I just can only imagine the man's response, the crowd's response. He's just like, thank you, Lord. I didn't even ask for this. I didn't even know I needed this. But you knew that I needed this need met first. You knew that. You knew my emotional state. You know what it's like to be rejected. And so Jesus heals him emotionally. He makes him feel like a living human being again in his disease, because you are not defined by your disorder. You are not defined by your stigma, by your disease, in this case, leprosy. And after he heals the man emotionally, he's like, you know what? Let's take care of that leprosy thing too. And it says this. When Jesus came down from the mountain, large crowds followed him. And a leper came to him and bowed down before him and said, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Jesus stretched out his hand and he touched him, and he said, I am willing, be cleansed. And immediately his leprosy was cleansed. God can. God completely can. Like, God knows your needs so much greater than you even know yourself. God sees your problems from a different perspective than you see your problems. God is so capable. And you guys, there's so many applications that I think that we can draw from this passage. We could ask questions like, who do you shame? Or who do you stigmatize in your community? Who do you look down upon and be like, oh, I just don't even want to touch that person. Person's so nasty, so gross. So I had a girl in my youth group, gosh, this was probably 7 years ago, and she had AIDS. And she came to youth group one night, and I'll tell you what, she was probably the most hard-looking person that I've ever seen, you know what I mean? Like, she was so jaded. She was so hurt. She had been rejected by her dad. She had been rejected by her mom. She was living with an uncle who was a pastor, great Christian man, but you could just see kind of the scowl on her face. Like, she came to youth group for the first time, and honestly, I don't even remember how she came to come to our youth group. Nobody knew her. She wasn't invited by a friend, but she was there one night, and it was like she was just waiting to be rejected. You could just see it. You could see her kind of just expecting it, because that's all she knew. And so she just had that crossed-armed and kind of that scowlish look, and just, you're going to reject, here's what you think of me too, I bet, and just kind of waiting to be hurt again. And so she pulled me aside afterwards, and she's just like, I have AIDS. Trying to kind of shock me a little bit, or just kind of, beat me to the punch of just like, whoa, really? Oh gosh, I don't know what to do here. And I said, really? I said, well, tell me your story. What happened, and how'd you come here tonight? And we're glad you're here. And we talked. And she was asking me these questions, and every time she spoke, she was just like kind of baiting me to do something. And I wasn't giving her what she was looking for. I wasn't like giving her that like rejection that she had been so used to. She came back the next week. She came back the following week. And week after week, she would pull me aside after youth group, and she would just ask these tough questions about like God and the church and people in general, and what I thought of this, and what do you think of that, and kind of looking for these just like, kind of attitude. And I wasn't feeding her that. And eventually she said, hey, can I come by your office? And she came by my office like a couple of times a week for several months. And we just developed this relationship where I put her at ease, I think. Like, I wasn't shocked at her. I wasn't terrified from, at her presence or anything. And I would hug her. And I was just, trying to love her as best as I could. And eventually, she really rededicated her life to Christ, and she would come into my office, and she would bring her guitar, and she's like, I just want to, I want to play you this song that I wrote. And she would just sit, and she would sing these songs, and she loved music, and you could just see her facade change. But my question to you would be, is there a people group or a specific person that you just tend to kind of shame or stigmatize and have a negative thought about that person? Or another application could be, we could talk about how this youth group treats the unlovable. What if someone like a Kai, her name was Kai, what if she came to this youth group? How would she be received? And, think of any other person in Rancho Cordova that you say, oh man, if that person or if that group of people came to our youth group, oh, that'd be horrible. What would you do? We could ask about what social matters do we as a church need to become more accurately educated about. We could also point out that in every church there are people suffering at the edges of the crowd. A lot of times you come to youth group and there's that person that just sits toward the back. They're hurting. There's that person who's just kind of scoots out away from the small group when they get together. There's always people hurting at the fringe. But just as the leper came through the crowd, you need to be brought into the fold. How are you guys doing at just recognizing those that are on the skirt of the youth group and just saying, you know what, come on in. Come on into the fold. Are we receiving people that way? I just want to focus though on a couple of applications. And this is the main one for you individually. Is this question: what are you willing to endure to humble yourself before God? What are you willing to endure to humble yourself before God? Because if we look at the leper's demonstration of faith, the most humiliating time in his life, going through that crowd, watching people jump out of his way, being yelled at, cursed at, spit at, who knows? Seeing parents grab their kids and pull them away from them. Like, would you endure something to get to where you can humble yourself before the Lord? Would you be willing to stand up in front of your locker room, in front of your team, and say, you know what, guys, I got something that I want to say? Would you make a demonstration of faith in your social circle? I wonder what that would look like for you. Where you work, where you live, where you hang out. What extents would you go to humble yourself before the Lord? And would you call Jesus Lord even if he doesn't remove your emergency or your affliction or remove the storm that you're in. See, this man said, I know you can, it's just if you're willing. And it wasn't a conditional thing. You get the tone from this man's demeanor and words that it wasn't like, God, this is the last chance I'm going to give you. He said, Lord, if you're willing, I know you can. Let your will be done. If you want to do it, do it. And it was because of the man's faith that I think that he was healed emotionally, he was healed physically. And you guys, that's the last thing, is that Jesus Christ will meet your needs spiritually, emotionally, physically. God is capable of doing anything and everything in your life that is good and that is going to glorify Him. And that's the bottom line. Are you looking to Him, or are you looking to that boyfriend or that girlfriend to meet your emotional need? Are you looking to God to say, God, I'm just going to keep coming to you. We're going through this storm right now, and I know that you can. That's what the Lord wants to hear. He just wants to hear a heart and an attitude that says, Lord, I know you're capable. Change my heart to accept whatever challenges you've given me.